Hello everyone from wherever you are in the world, and thank you for joining us. I am Louise Hosking, IOSH Vice President, and I would like to welcome you to the latest in our series of COVID-19 webinars. IOSH, the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, is the chartered body and the world's largest membership organisation for health and safety professionals. Our vision is a safer, healthier world of work for all. We started these free weekly COVID-19 webinars at the beginning of April, and today is our 20th in the series. This session addresses what's on many people's minds right now: how to manage the dynamic nature of this pandemic, especially work during local lockdowns, and the adjustments required when situations change. For the UK, since the easing of lockdown, cases have risen again in certain settings, and in some areas such as Leicester, Greater Manchester, Oldham and Aberdeen, we've seen considerable spikes. On the 30th of June, the city of Leicester remained in lockdown as the rest of the country's restrictions eased, and the situation there remains under review. To date, in Britain, over 20 areas have been placed in local lockdown, with conditions continuing to change. Other parts of the world are tackling the virus and implementing local restrictions. International travel and trade remains precarious. We must all maintain a strong sense of awareness and understanding of exactly what is happening, not only in the UK, but worldwide. Only by keeping an eye on changing situations and accessing the most credible information can we continue to function safely in the world of work. Next week, IOSH will be launching its latest Returning Safely guidance, focusing on managing local lockdowns. We will link to this on our website. So, in today's session, I'm delighted to introduce our panel. I'm joined on the panel, first of all, by consultant and IOSH past president, Craig Foyle, who is a chartered fellow of IOSH and specialises in project management safety, training and management systems, predominantly in the FMCG, chemical infrastructure and service industries. Craig provides consultancy support for clients worldwide. Next, I would like to welcome Lucy Robinson, who is the Director of Resources for the East Midlands Chambers of Commerce and is currently leading their return to work planning on COVID-19. Lucy's background is in HR consultancy across all services and types of businesses. In her role within the Chamber, she is focusing on developing the culture of the Chamber and its strategic human resources. And finally, we welcome Matthew Jackson, Head of Health, Safety, Environment and Quality at WSP in the Middle East. He is an IOSH Council member and Vice Chair of our consultancy group. A chartered member of IOSH and a graduate of the University of Greenwich, London, with a BSc in Occupational Health, Safety and Environment, Matt has over 10 years' experience in managing health and safety in sectors including waste management, education, construction and consultancy. In the next hour, Craig, Lucy and Matt will be exploring how organisations can plan a safe return to work effectively whilst dealing with both the easing of restrictions and as restrictions are imposed potentially in different ways. So I'd like to welcome our panellists, and if I can ask you all to turn your videos on. I'm going to jump straight into asking questions, and if you are on the line and you want to use the Q&A box, I'll be coming to those shortly. So I'm going to start by asking all of our panellists the same question, starting with yourself, Matt, and ask each of you to provide an initial insight into your role and your organisations and the specific challenges that you've faced over this time. So welcome, Matt, if I could start with you with that question.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks for the introduction. So, as you mentioned, I'm head of HSEQ for WSP in the Middle East. My role as part of the pandemic to date has been by no means a subject matter expert. I don't think any of us have been a subject matter expert in COVID-19. We're slowly but surely getting there, I think. But also my role has been a CMT member. So as part of our crisis management team, which consists of our CEO, our operations director, director of HR, and myself. At a regional level, I've played a key part of that team, and that's consisted of developing processes and mechanisms to protect our people, consolidating and verifying information from across the Middle East region, tracking and testing cases. We've had quite an aggressive testing regime out here, and facilitating the return to work of those people who have unfortunately tested positive for the virus. Mental health and wellbeing has also been a key part of my role as part of the pandemic. And now that we've started returning to offices, facilitating that has also been a key part of my role. Challenges that we've faced throughout the pandemic has been fast changing circumstances, fast moving information, making decisions on verified information, and effective decisions that we can quickly communicate to our business. Travellers stuck outside our region has been a particular challenge. Those who've been caught out when borders have been closed, and communication with our people, particularly being in the Middle East, we have a lot of expatriates, and in times of crisis or a pandemic, they tend to rely on their employer as a comfort blanket. So that's been a particular challenge for us.
That's great. And Lucy, if I could come to you next, so what's the role that you've had in your specific, a few specific challenges that you've faced?
I think some of them overlap with actually what Matthew's just touched on, and it is very difficult because this is a new situation for everybody. So we are trying to battle through it as best we can, and keep up to date with information that we're getting through regarding the virus and how we can obviously support people and keep people safe. So with the HR side, I also cover facilities, and obviously health and safety comes under that. The initial impact, I suppose, was about getting everybody working remotely as quickly and safely as possible. So we did that quite quickly. Luckily, as an organisation, we were already slightly flexibly working anyway. It's definitely gone more in that direction, and I can envisage that sort of staying the same. But it was, from my perspective from HR, I suppose furlough came into a big part of that, but also keeping people in contact for their own mental health and wellbeing whilst they were furloughed. I think a lot of businesses potentially haven't contacted people very much. I've seen that mentioned to me quite a lot from people that have been furloughed from other businesses and things, that they've said, hardly anybody's contacted me. I'm really worried about my job. We're in lockdown, I can't go and do anything. So keeping my mind active and sane has been quite difficult. So I suppose my role within our business has been keeping people in contact to make sure that anxiety level is kept down as much as possible. And now obviously we're switching to bringing people back into the office, and that's only started as of this week actually for us. But it's also been about helping our members to navigate everything. So East Midlands Chamber set up a COVID toolkit. And again, initially that was the same as what we dealt with, furlough based, now switching to more of a health and safety perspective. I think some of the big challenges that we've found is making sure that we communicate enough and in the right way with different people, and understanding that everybody's a bit individual in the way that they might like to have communications. It's all new, so we are working and adapting quickly. Some people adapt to those changes well, others are very worried about it. And again, that comes back into sort of the mental health and wellbeing. At the minute, the challenges are around those that might be living with people that have got serious health conditions. So as you're moving back to a place of business, how can you balance the needs of the business and the individual, and make sure that you try and get the right balance? And again, I think that's much about working with those people, communicating as best you can, and trying to really understand what they will miss from not being in the business. Now, a manufacturing business versus an office is going to be very different. So I think, each business is going to have its own considerations and really needs to think about that as well. And initially, one of the big challenges, as I say, was getting people to adjust to home working. they weren't only trying to work, they were trying to be a teacher, a parent, looking after animals, whatever it might be that keeps interrupting webinars and sessions and meetings that you might have been on. But it's also about the home setup not always being the best from a display screen sort of setup, and not sitting on the right sort of chairs and whatever it might be. So I think that was another big thing for us, just making sure that we could try and accommodate what we could and help people to move swiftly to be in home working in the safest way possible.
Thanks, Lucy. And Craig, same question for you.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective as a consultant providing guidance and support to clients, for me, it's been how can we help them to come up with the sensible solutions to the problems that we're facing. And many of my clients are global clients, therefore they've got global requirements that they've got to follow. So from my perspective, it's assisting them into making the global requirement fit with the UK requirements, and also coming up with practical solutions to try and help them get it right. And with the lockdown coming in, and I deal with capital projects and training especially, and a lot of them were postponed for a long period. And so I've also taken the opportunity to support other people outside of my work remit, so charities or other interested parties who just don't know what to do. And so I've taken that benefit really to try and help people to keep moving and understand that you can do things in lockdown situations within the parameters that we're given, and encourage people to manage the risk, not think that you can't do anything. And for certainly in my role, the challenges have been the lack of face-to-face interaction, because as a consultant, you're in there at sites, you're talking to boards of directors, you're talking to managers, supervisors, but you're also walking out and talking to workers and construction workers, and you can't do that. And so with the local lockdowns, you find that you need to find different ways of engaging with people. And so I've been using Zoom and other video technology for many years. In my presidential term, as you know, Louise, we really started to ramp up the use of Zoom. And so it's I spent a lot of time educating people, and I think I've actually been as much an IT support to my clients in terms of, this is how you do this is how you do that, and did you know you can do this, and educating people on how to make the most of the IT that they've always had but never had to use. And as the other speakers have mentioned, it's about that well-being side. And so the safety practitioners that I've been dealing with, they've known what they're doing, and that's great. But equally, I've been engaging with engineers or project managers or administrators or workers, and just having a chat. And literally yesterday, I was on the phone, on a Teams call with somebody for 45 minutes. And although it was a client, it was a well-being discussion. There was no actual work involved, no process to follow, but the challenge is to keep people talking and keep people understanding. And for me, probably one of the most significant challenges is the restrictions on travel. Now, so I was in Malaysia in March, and I was thinking, do I go or do I not go? It was before the full lockdown in the UK, but I risk assessed it, I planned it, and I went out, exceptional personal hygiene, but stayed either in the hotel or the venue that I was training at, and I didn't go in to look at the sites for the location. I was in Kuala Lumpur. It would have been fantastic to have a look, but I didn't, and I managed it within that. And so we'll talk about the local lockdowns a bit next, and the challenges that we're going to face with trying to preempt what to do and how to do it.
Brilliant, thanks, Craig. So thinking more about this specific topic now, and specifically around local lockdowns, and I know you've all experienced something similar. I'm going to come to you first of all, Lucy, with your role in terms of the chamber. What are the challenges that businesses are facing at the moment where they're finding themselves in a local lockdown area, and in terms of, you know, how they continue to trade and do business when, you know, there could be, you know, another business, you know, a few hundred yards up the road perhaps, who are not in that lockdown area, and how are you working with those businesses and advising them at the moment?
I think it gets very complicated. I don't think, and it's really hard for the government to advise on every single scenario, and it does keep changing. I think what we've seen is whether people can travel outside of the lockdown area into businesses has been a question. And of course, I think the businesses again need to think whether or not they do need to ask people to travel in. And if they do, then obviously making the areas as safe as possible. If people are travelling from inside the lockdown area to outside of the lockdown area, again, the reverse is true, and making sure that obviously when then people are coming into work, whether they've got good testing facilities or ways to you know, keep people safe and check that obviously they're not potentially bringing COVID into the workplace is really important. But again, the government guidance has been a little bit grey, let's say, in terms of some of those areas. And I think the other thing then that we found our members asking is if especially they're a service business that have been told to stay shut during the extended lockdown, and they're missing out potentially on business because people, even in the lockdown area, are potentially breaching what they're being told to do in some respects and going outside of the area to seek those services. So it has been very difficult for businesses, and I think that's where again it's a fine line between what the economy needs and you know, those businesses and keeping safe really. And I think it is really difficult. And if we look at the impact on people captured within that lockdown area, because we've got an office in Leicester, I'm actually just outside of the lockdown area, but our office is in Leicester. We've not returned to that office yet. So we're waiting on further guidance because it is still to work at home where possible. But I have noticed that the well-being of those individuals particularly are being impacted more, because what they're seeing is other people outside of the area starting to get back to some normality, being able to see friends and family and do things a little bit more normal, even if it's the new normal. And that's having an impact on their health and well-being, especially around sort of mental health. And they're even more anxious about the return to office because they know that obviously Leicester's been one of the areas that's had sort of high rates for a while now. So I think that's really difficult. And I think we go back to something Craig was mentioning just about travel. There's of course the personal side of that, you know, not necessarily on a business travel perspective, but a lot of people having holidays cancelled, not knowing whether they're going to get refunds, whether insurance covers them. And again, this links back to sort of health and well-being. And we've had a lot of people sort of say, actually, I can cope with maybe one or two things, but, you know, I can't take a holiday the way I would normally and get away from it all. And if I do, am I putting my family at risk, or people when I come back at risk? Am I going to potentially book a holiday and lose all of the money for it? So financial worries. There's all sorts of things that are sort of impacting on people at the minute. So I think it's really difficult.
And Matt, I'm going to come to you next. So, you know, in terms of local lockdown, you're in the Middle East, and you know, they've had quite a robust view of this. Do you want to just sort of talk about what it's been like over there, and in particular, I mean, when we're talking about local lockdowns, it's kind of differences in the way that people are working as well. So if you can just talk about, you know, those essential services that have kept running and the differences with workers that have perhaps been in a much stricter lockdown, and how that's been handled over there.
Yeah, I mean, we had quite a phased approach to lockdown. I mean, particularly in the UAE, we started off with with curfews, where we were allowed, you know, you were allowed to go out in the operating hours of the day, and then it was certain hours in the evening, from sort of dusk till dawn, should we say, where you weren't allowed to go out. I mean, there was various different types of technology used by the police, particularly in the UAE. I mean, we saw drones being used with facial recognition to understand who was out when they shouldn't be, and fines were being issued. So they took quite a strong stance, towards this. And then we sort of went into a full lockdown, for a fair amount of time. And during that period, there was essential services, as you say, that we're still allowed to, go to work, and particularly the construction sector, which we operate in, that was considered as an essential sector. So yeah, it was quite challenging. I think one of the biggest challenges was, is people who worked in that construction sector then coming home to their family, where, they weren't going out, but still, considering being in an essential sector, being on site, being around multiple people, there's more exposure there to someone who could potentially be carrying COVID-19, and then bringing that back into the house. And touching on the mental health element again, it's quite challenging for people. And then we sort of had a phased approach out of lockdown. We saw again the essential sectors just continue to work right through. There was reduced capacity, particularly at construction sites, travelling vehicles. There was a number of mechanisms that the government put in place to reduce the impact. And to protect people. And then the phased approach really was, essential services, restaurants reopening, shops reopening. And again, that was done on a capacity basis. And it was, so we sort of went to 25% to 50%, then increased, and now we're at 100%. So you can have up to 100% of your workforce back in the office. It's not a personal decision we've decided to take. But we can have it. We've stuck at a 50% capacity for all of our offices to maintain social distancing, but that's just a choice of our own. We're not in a position to rush people back to the office. So yeah, it's been quite a challenge.
Thanks, Matt. And Craig, just over to you. We're talking about local lockdowns, but actually, particularly in the UK, health is a devolved issue. So you could have the same organisation working across different boundaries and so on. And you work quite a lot in the food manufacturing sector. So in terms of sort of local lockdowns and differences in restrictions, what are the kind of things that you're experiencing, whether that be across the UK or in different parts of Europe and beyond?
Yeah, I think the challenges there are at what level do the companies try and instill these controls. And so, for example, if you've got a organisation with different sites across the UK, Europe, or beyond, it's trying to have some type of common denominator, a common standard. However, when there is a local lockdown, it produces that increased pressure. And one of the questions that somebody's put through is about key workers and travelling either into a lockdown area or outside of a lockdown area. Now, when the UK was in full lockdown, key workers could still travel to go to the work. And so that situation will be the same. But, and as Lucy mentioned, there's slight greyness in guidance, but equally, any government around the world, it's difficult to have explicit information for every single little point of detail. And so I think that's the challenge. But it's also the frequency of how quickly lockdowns, the local lockdowns maybe come in or come out again. And so I was in France a few weeks ago, and I was morning, noon and night, and probably a few times in between, checking the websites to find out about the safe travel corridors that the UK has provided. And I returned from France, and that was all absolutely fine. And then literally a few days ago, 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, France is taken out of the safe travel corridor. And so it's that looking ahead for where the hotspots are, but also what impact it might have on the workforce, but also trying to travel there. And unfortunately, I've been playing I call it COVID bingo, where I go to a workplace and I see controls put in place to prevent contact points for COVID-19, brilliant. But it's fire doors that are wedged open with significant items that cannot easily be removed. And so we've also got to think about all the other aspects of safety and health that may be impacted by the control measures that we're putting in. And this is nothing new in safety and health. When you introduce a control measure, you should think about what impact that control measure might have on your other controls that you might face. And so for the travel perspective, if I just focus on that, when I'm talking to clients, I say to them, it's easier for me to get there via public transport. However, do you want me to travel via public transport? Because the guidance in the UK suggests that if you can avoid it, please do. And then some clients are saying to me, absolutely, please come in your car. And it would be a journey I wouldn't normally drive. But then sometimes it's not practical. And I've got a trip to Europe planned in a couple of weeks' time. And I was going to fly from a local airport via Amsterdam and then Amsterdam to the site. But now the Netherlands and France are not in the safe travel corridor. I've got to then now quickly change plans, find a different way of getting there. And I've considered driving to this location, and it would have been a long drive, perfect from a COVID perspective, but not good from a safety and health perspective for the other reasons. So it's that dynamic situation of keeping an eye on what's going on and being ready to react to it, but having a plan B and then a plan C as well, because things do change that often.
And just and with your kind of food manufacturing head on, one of the questions from Mike Evans is saying, you know, the food and drink manufacturing sector are denoted as key workers. You know, what happens if somebody's living in a lockdown area? Have you come across that, and how are you advising your clients in respect of that at the moment?
So there is the requirement or the ability in the UK for key workers to be able to travel, to get to work. And so the clients I've got, they are actively educating their employees on how to manage COVID within the workplace. But there's that equal level of responsibility to say, you are a key worker. We need you to make sure that you are thinking about the impact you may have as a person on the wider population, because of, you know, you could follow all those rules and procedures on site and then go back, mix with many households, not wear the right protection, not do your personal hygiene levels that you would do at work, and then you could become infected and then take that into the workplace situation. And so although people are not technically at work until they physically get there, clients are thinking about, how are you getting to work? Can you travel on your own? Can you know, rather than having lots of employees together in a close confined area such as a car, for example. So we're thinking about giving guidance to help people to be COVID safe and COVID ready outside of work, to then mean that when they get to work, they're safe and healthy.
And Lucy, kind of tied in with that theme, just with your HR hat on now, you know, what happens if, you know, there's a number of questions that are kind of following the same theme in the Q&A box around, you know, organisations want to get people back to work, you know, from an HR perspective. If people are feeling, you know, vulnerable in going back to work, or they could have, you know, vulnerable people in their households, what's the kind of advice that you might be offering to business in respect of that from an HR perspective?
I think again, it's really focused around the open communication and having good conversations with people, finding out exactly what their concerns are and seeing whether you can eliminate it almost through the individual sort of risk assessment with that person. If there's no other choice than to bring them back, I know some businesses are trying to operate it so they might change the sort of hours so they're less likely to have to use transport at peak times. They're trying to eliminate as many of the risks, or the higher risks, as possible, so that they feel comfortable in coming back. We've obviously been told by the government, you know, in most areas now, apart from those that have got localised lockdowns, that shielding's somewhat lapsed now. So people are being told they should be coming back into work if that's what their work are demanding. Now, as an employer, I would always ask the question first of why, what's the business reason for it? You'd need to have a really good argument, I think, if you were pressurising somebody into coming back in and actually they'd been fully adjusted and working at home during that time. If then you're causing them extra risk and something happens, you've got to expect that there might be some comeback to that. However, if they're in a role that can't be carried out at home fully, again, it's about having those discussions, communicating openly with them and trying to eliminate the risks where you can eliminate those risks.
And what if, you know, somebody's in that situation and they feel that the arrangements that are in their workplace are not, you know, they feel concerned about whether their office or their workplace is actually COVID secure? What kind of advice would you be giving to them then?
I think my initial advice would always be but most businesses will have to have the health and safety representatives in place for the COVID risk assessments to be put into place. So they should be able to contact those people and maybe raise queries that way. If you've almost got two sides to this, you've got businesses that are going to care and are going to offer support, and those that may not. So even if the first route is to raise it through the reps, or raise it through their manager or HR or whoever might be there for them to speak to, if that goes nowhere, of course you have got whistleblowing options. I'd always say to people, try and work it out with the business where possible, raise the questions and see whether there's ways around it and that you can work together. If you believe you will get nowhere with that and it raises further concerns, then there are whistleblowing options, and it is a case then of potentially taking it further and making it known that obviously that company does not seem to be trying to put either any or many measures in place to help protect their workforce.
Great, thanks. And thank you, Lucy. And Matt, I'm going to come to you next. Great question from Hardeep Sanghera. He's asking, what are the differences between the government in the UK and the Middle East in respect of coronavirus? Do you think that the government has done enough in the UK? Because it sounds like you've experienced some quite, you know, there's been some quite significant restrictions in the Middle East. And are there some things that we can perhaps learn from your experience here in the UK and elsewhere?
Without getting political.
Yes, you can get political.
Yeah, I'm obviously being a UK citizen, I've been watching it from afar in the UK as well as how we've handled things here. It's difficult to comment really, because I think initially the UK was probably quite slow off the mark in terms of how they potentially handled things, whereas I think the Middle East region, you know, probably reacted a lot quicker in terms of their response, particularly around the test and trace. I know that's coming in more recently in the UK the last month or so, and it's something that we've had in place here right from the very beginning. I mean, you had a slight symptom of COVID-19 and you could call the Ministry of Health and you were in for a test, 14-day self-isolation. So, yeah, I think guidance was probably one of the biggest ones. But, you know, we also had a lot of frustrations here in the Middle East with conflicting health authorities. You know, we've got United Arab Emirates, but then you've got Abu Dhabi and Dubai, which have own got the health authorities, and sometimes their advice was not exactly straightforward in terms of them both being on the same page. So I think it's hard to say. I think, you know, both have reacted to it now. I think they've probably reacted differently in terms of the quick reaction to that response. But there's probably things that, you know, the UK have done that we have not seen in the Middle East region. I think travel was probably the biggest one in the UK that I saw the Middle East really clamp down on very quickly. You know, closing borders. I mean, even now, anyone who comes into the country has got to have a test before boarding a plane. They've got to have a test on arrival. They've got to be in quarantine until they get that test result. I think that's one of the areas that the UK was quite slow with. But I think, you know, like I say, without getting political, it's I think there's lessons that can be learned from both sides in the UK and the Middle East.
And there's a really great, just staying with you, Matt, there's a really great question here from Ghania Mustafa, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who's in the construction sector. And, you know, I think this is a global wide issue where we've got clients who, you know, need their projects completed. And in the midst of this, we've got that kind of client pressure. They want to deliver their project on time. You know, how do we manage those? It's that kind of productivity, safety, tug of war piece. You know, how are you seeing that being managed over there in the Middle East?
Yeah, it's definitely been it's definitely been difficult. I mean, you know, for a start, we're reducing capacities on construction projects, you know, so the less workforce you have on site, then naturally the less productivity you're going to get. But I mean, what we found particularly in the Middle East is clients were particularly understanding of you know, the risk that was present, and they accepted that there was going to be less people on site, therefore there was going to be less productivity. So for us, it was really working with our clients and you know, having them understand the situation that we're in. I mean, like you say, this is happening globally. So, you know, the Middle East, we can't shy away from this. There's probably projects all around the world that there's going to be some form of a delay as a result of COVID-19. So, like I say, I think it's just acceptance of what we're going through and working through it together, and understanding that it is going to have an impact, you know, particularly on the delivery time of a project.
Yeah, brilliant. And Craig, I'm going to come to you next. Craig, again, it's kind of pulling on your experience in the food sector. Certainly here in the UK, we've had some outbreaks in the food sector, and you and I have had discussions about personal responsibility. So, you know, businesses are doing everything that they can at the moment to be COVID secure, but there's an element of personal responsibility in terms of all of this and what people do outside of the workplace. So in terms of your experience in the sectors that you're working, you know, how are you seeing businesses manage that piece?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question, and Jane Betts has asked a question kind of about that regarding employees that travel abroad on their own time and then come back to work. And so on the main lockdown in UK, it was all the site processes and procedures said, if you've travelled abroad within the last 14 days, you cannot come to site. But with these local lockdowns, the sites need to be much more dynamic as to how they deal with it, because really it should say, have you been in an area that's locked down, rather than name any specific geographical location, in terms of, like we said about Leicester and Oldham and Manchester and places, and there's other places globally. And so I think for us, we want people to be accountable for themselves. And James' question was, if an employee, for example, has gone to Greece in their own time and they come back, should they be tested before they come back to work? Now, that can give some employee relations issues, let alone any safety and health issues. So from a pure safety and health perspective, you could say it's not unreasonable to request that somebody's tested to say that they are clear, although they're clear on the day that they're tested, rather than it's like a car check, isn't it? So, but we want them to have that level of responsibility that says, I've exposed myself to an area which may mean that I could have been infected. The problem we've got is it depends on, in effect, how you pay your staff. Because if somebody's not going to get paid if they self-isolate for 14 days, then challenge yourself. Are they going to really say that they might have been exposed to somebody with COVID-19? And so you need to have that relationship with your staff, companies and the staff, and determine what your requirements are, but then encourage people to stick to it and then work with it. And in the food and drink industry, there's always been exceptional requirements for personal hygiene, and you know, the washing of the hands and the clothes and everything's got to be exactly right. But they've ramped it up and they're doing even more. And the temperature checking. When I went to Malaysia in March, the airports had scanners and your temperature's being checked, and I was being checked before I went into the premises every day. UK took a long time to catch up with that, and but a lot of the food sites I work on now, your temperature is checked as you walk in. If your temperature shows high on the thermal imaging, you're not literally moved out straight away. You're put to one side on your own, and you're given 30 minutes, and then you're tested again with a more accurate device. So it's not a random, someone's exceptionally hot, therefore they must have COVID. But the personal responsibility is definitely the requirement. So the challenge you've got is where an employee thinks that their company is not doing enough. And as Lucy's already mentioned, something's got to happen. You should not put yourself in a situation where you feel exceptionally unsafe. And so talk to your representatives, talk to your safety teams, talk to the management. But if all else fails, that's when you need to think about going to a regulator. And in the UK, it would be the local authority if you're like offices and shops, or if it be the health and safety executive if you're in a factory. But it's different around the world. But yeah, don't put yourself in that situation. And when I'm going out and about outside of work, I've removed myself from a specific situation because I felt uneasy, and we want everyone to take that level of responsibility as well.
Yeah. And Lucy, I'm going to pick up on the same topic with you, and Christopher Cooper has put this beautifully, and I've certainly experienced this in the work that I've been doing, where we've got people who are at work doing absolutely the right thing. They go off at the weekend and they're not necessarily following those strict measures. From an HR perspective, that's a very difficult area to handle. So as an employer, purely from an HR perspective, what are the options for, perhaps the carrot and the stick options that might be useful?
I think it goes back, I mean, we've already mentioned a lot of this is a person being responsible and trying to keep themselves, family, friends, and work colleagues safe. My guidance would be make sure that you've communicated very clearly what you expect. I think this is one of the first times where you are seeing a real merging of work and life, and the impact that your life could have on the safety of other people within work. And again, I think if you make that clear and communicate it in the right way with your staff, then actually you get to a position where you can have constructive conversations. And again, it would depend on the severity of it and the impact or risk that it poses. But I think if you've got the policies in place, you're continuing to issue guidance and updates around local lockdowns and travel, the air bridges and other things that are in place. I think if you continue to put things in place and make sure that that's well communicated on a policy, if people then aren't following that guidance, and it's reasonable guidance, and you've explained why it's important, and I think everybody knows the situation and the way that it is. So I think anybody turning around and saying they don't understand the risk that can would be a complete lie from their part. I think you can actually then take it further. So worst case scenario, you're talking disciplinary. If it's very, very severe in what they've done, you could even be talking gross misconduct because they are putting other people at risk to
they're bringing a risk into the workplace, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think that's it. It's then, if you've set the boundaries and you've communicated why, and you think and believe you're being fair about it, actually this is one of the first times I think when what people are doing outside of work really is going to have an impact on the work life. So I think that is where you could then potentially take it further, but you need to put some guidelines down and really communicate your expectations. I think one thing that I've seen a few times is some of this is self-policed. So it's other colleagues going, I think you're putting me at risk, so stop doing what you're doing at the weekend, going to an illegal rave or whatever it might be. I've heard, numerous different things that have happened. So I think it self-polices somewhat. I think the other thing, of course, is social media will allow us to see things that people are doing. And again, it's about having those policies in place and checking those. And that could be your evidence if you need to raise it with somebody.
And another question for you, just very briefly, from Linda Ramirez, is she's saying that, all managers, generally line managers, I think we're all kind of in the same boat. People are juggling extra workloads. How can organisations support their workforce in terms of juggling all of these additional responsibilities that are now in place?
Again, it's very difficult, and we talk to a lot of SMEs, so they've not got capacity, they've not got extra people they can bring in, or a lot of businesses are potentially losing staff. So I think this pressure is going to continue to increase. again, I go back to communication and managers having conversations with their people. And I think, you know, every manager's got somebody they should be able to go to. The other thing that you could do is put in place counselling services, occupational health services, utilising, there's a lot of stuff actually the government have put out that are free to use tools around managing your own mental health. And I think, you know, a lot of that is useful stuff that you can put out to your the people within your organisation at very little cost, that offers them ways to support themselves. And they will find their way through that and know potentially already what works best for them, whether that's keeping active. That's one thing for me. You know, you can be sat getting fatigued in front of a computer quite a lot of the time now, and you are taking on extra work. And even if you're working at home, those hours merge, don't they, then a lot more. And so I think getting up and taking regular breaks and things is so important. And again, it's following some of the standard guidance that we should have been following anyway, but making sure we do that better.
And Matt, a question for you, and this is, you know, and I think this is going to be important, as you know, we're at the end of August, coming into September, in respect of schools. So question from Joe Crickson for you, Matt, is how are the reopening of schools being handled over there in the Middle East? From you know, are they partially opening? You know, what screening's going on? You know, how's it being handled where you are?
So in the Middle East, and so if I talk about the UAE first, because there's been different approaches across the region. So they've offered parents multiple options. One is blended learning, so they can have so many days in the classroom, so many days utilising online learning platforms. They've cut classes in half in some of the schools. So rather than having a class of 20, they've gone to classes of 10 to sort of form those bubbles. And some countries within the region have just made a decision that September is just too soon. And what we saw when the schools closed is they went onto an online learning platform over here, and we will see that continue in some of the countries across the Middle East. So yeah, it's quite a mixed approach, but you know, it's also, I think it's similar to the UK from what the Prime Minister said, is, you know, that schools are critical to the economy. It's, you know, it's getting people back to work, is, you know, childcare is, you know, is a huge contributing factor to that, and it's something that we as a business have been quite conscious of as well. So it's difficult, but that's the way they've looked at it, particularly in the Middle East, is quite a blended approach. You know, some online learning, some in classroom. Certainly, it's reduced capacity in classrooms. I suppose we'll see how that works out. It's it's a bit of a waiting game, I suppose, like anything else with COVID-19 is test and adjust. So yeah, that's generally how they've seen it. But they've been very late in making the decision. I mean, I think this week is the week that they've come out and given options of how to reopen schools.
Yeah. And just staying with you, Matt, with your construction head on, really good question from Katie Harmon here. So if we think about the nature of construction workers, and I think this is, you know, this relates globally, is, you know, at all levels in terms of construction, people work in different locations across different sites. So if we're trying to, you know, protect individual projects, you know, we could have general, you know, workers through to designers and managers working across different sites. So how are you seeing that that's being managed?
So, I mean, it's been a particular challenge for us because obviously we're a consultant, and particularly our designers can work on, you know, 2, 3, 4 projects at a time. So it's something that we've been really conscious of, and we've sort of said to our people is, you know, you need to be very careful, make sure that when you are there, you're following precautionary measures. I mean, you have to wear masks here. It's a legal requirement to wear masks in the Middle East, and you will be fined if not wearing masks. So it's, again, quite a rigid response to this. And a lot of our clients have mandated where you do have people working across multiple sites, then they have to get a COVID test before coming onto site, and that has to, and there's a lot of applications here. So we've got a CHAR app, which is one in the UAE. And whenever you get a test, it registers on there, and you've got a green QR code. And a lot of the projects, you have to present that prior to going onto the project. So I think technology plays a key part in that, but also it's having a testing facility that's available. We have a private medical system here in the Middle East. So again, the challenges that with the NHS is, you can pay to have a COVID test here. And our medical insurance covers that. If not, what we've said as a business, we would cover the cost of that. If it's a client requirement, none of our people would ever be left out of pocket. So technology, I think, is a key one. Raising awareness, those people who are working over a number of sites, to be quite rigid in terms of their preventative measures. And we've seen a lot on a lot of our sites is thermal scanning. The thermal temperature scanning, and as a secondary measure in all of our offices, we're taking temperatures. We have a no mask, no entry policy. So I think it's just reinforcing the basic precautionary measures and raising awareness. I mean, monthly we're doing calls with projects teams continuing to reinforce that message and not letting up, particularly with restrictions being lifted. Complacency can set in, so it's just that continuous message and reinforcement, really.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Now, Ben in the background is going to launch the poll in a moment, which we really value your feedback. And I'm just going to go around the panel with one final question, which is in terms of, obviously we're in a completely different world now. We're in a new normal, but there are positives that are coming out of this. So, what are the things that each of our panelists have really taken away from the situation that we're in at the moment that's a positive driver for business that hopefully we'll move forward with? And Lucy, I'm going to come to you and ask you to answer that question first. So, what are the positives that have come out of it for you?
I think some of the positives that we can take away are that people are more aware about other people, and there is a caring nature coming out through a lot of the good feel, the good vibe media that's coming across. So I think that's the way that feels, and I think that's potentially a positive thing. And people understanding from, if we're going back to specifically sort of health and safety, that it is everybody's responsibility. I think that again is something that is now really, really clear, and people do get that. From another perspective, you could say that actually being flexible and companies working smarter, which gives people a better work-life balance, is potentially something that's going to be really good to take away from this. And, there's studies that have been out there for quite a while that prove that sort of smarter, more flexible working is known to increase productivity. So as we see the economy hopefully start to shift in the right direction, you'd hope that some of that will be a benefit to the economy and to businesses as a whole moving forward. They're going to make savings in other areas if people do start to work from home. We've seen ourselves during the lockdown period that it's really reduced travel costs, utility costs, site security, a number of other things across our sites. So there are benefits and gains to both individuals and businesses that could come out of this as well.
Thank you, Lucy. And Craig, same question for you.
I think from my perspective, my real positive I've taken from this is challenge the norm. And what I mean by that is my role is going out to site. So I'm either traveling in my car for an hour or 2 hours each way, or I'm flying or rail. And so for me, I've challenged the norm. I've looked at what I've done, and then I'm thinking, how can I do it differently? And not only was it necessary for me in lockdown for my mindset, because it was, I cannot do my job. Now it's, how can I do my job differently? And I embrace change and I embrace technology. And so I've delivered a virtual managing safety course a few weeks ago with delegates from the UK, but Ghana and Nigeria as well. And I would never have had delegates from Ghana and Nigeria on a face-to-face course at the same time as in the UK. And so from a business perspective, it's opened up that marketplace. Now we need the background and the technology and the provision of materials to enabled us to do that without posting things around the world. But, IOSH are working on that. But for me, technology, one, embrace the technology. Time, as Lucy has said, people are actually working more, potentially a lot of people more efficiently because they're working in that home environment. And for me, it's also the positive I've taken. You know who your friends are. You know who your professional friends are in a crisis. And literally, I've had people contact me out of the blue. How are you doing? Now, I've been doing that to all of my contacts throughout, and it's been so nice for me to get that. And Matt's actually on the call now. Matt sent me a text the other day. How are you doing? And I can't tell you how much that gives me the positiveness of people care. So think about that. And the last bit really is accept that when people working at home, they can work, because many organisations have thought if you work from home, you're skiving, you're not trying to do the job. And actually, that balance that Lucy mentioned is so important, because if you want to have a half an hour lunch break and sit in the garden for 30 minutes, brilliant. You'll work much better in the afternoon. But how many people really take breaks when they're in the office? So just take it, embrace it, and be positive, and that will really make a great difference.
Brilliant, that's great. And Matt, the final takeaway from you.
Yeah, I mean, touching on what both Lucy and Craig have said there, particularly on mental health in this region, we've been quite slow to the mark in terms of the focus on mental health, just because of the different cultures and nationalities that we have here. But I think, the opportunity we take away from this is it's certainly put it front and centre in terms of that focus. That caring element that Lucy touched on, and working from home. I think we've all been very surprised of the lacking drop of productivity as a result of people working from home. And it's an opportunity for us to have a better work-life balance. And just the last one, I know I'm conscious of time. I'm looking at the time here, and so is Louise probably. I think it's given us an opportunity. I think people have a far better understanding of risk control and hierarchy of control in order to protect themselves. And that's certainly something that we're going to use as an opportunity to springboard into other areas of IOSH within our business, whilst people have got that awareness now, and use it as an opportunity to build on.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I cannot believe how quickly an hour goes by. So thank you so much to Lucy, to Matt and to Craig, who've been on our panel today. And thank you to all of you as well for tuning in. I think we've shared some excellent insights. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all of your questions, but I hope that everyone has given you a clear steer on what we should be doing to assist a safe return and continuation of work during this pandemic. Let me just remind you again that IOSH has its own COVID-19 resources page, which everybody can access, and a recording from today's session will also be going live and will be posted on the website as well, so please do visit that. In 2 weeks' time, our next webinar will be called The Cost of COVID-19, the Future Workplace and its Impact on People. So do tune into that. Registration, as you have done today, is going to be online. So yeah, thank you again to everybody on the panel, and please do stay safe, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you.